Voila. All right. Beautiful. Everything. Another couple of people. Welcome, welcome. Just in time. Just in time. We were starting by naming the topic. So in the recent survey that I ran on pain points and challenges of public affairs professionals, internal alignment emerged very clearly as, in a way, the most underestimated driver of influence, but a very, very important one. So now, as I've pronounced the word influence, before we dive in, maybe let me say a word about how I approach influence. And some of you here on this call may have heard me say this before, but I'll say it again. We have cracked the code for influence. And there's a simple equation for it that I will share with you right now. And that's the following. Influence is a factor of leadership and storytelling. And by leadership in this context, and in fact, it's the best definition that I found of leadership. And it works very well in this context. And it's basically having a vision and the ability to bring with you a group of people towards a greater good. So that's leadership in the context of influence. And the second is often easier than the first. Many organizations are good at mobilization. Fewer are truly clear on why they exist, what the future is that they aspire to, and what greater good they serve. So, but we'll come back to this idea of vision because it's quite essential to influence. And the other side of the equation is storytelling. And you know what I mean by that. You know, the ability to create meaning and coherence in a world that's increasingly complex and noisy, with arguments that not only convince the brain, but also touch the heart, the gut in a way. And there has to be an emotional dimension to storytelling. So all of this, by the way, is the topic of an entirely different masterclass, and we could spend, the whole session talking about just this. But I wanted to bring that in and put it here for context. And also, just to finish with context, just 2 minutes on context. Around that core, I've developed a number of concepts over the years. Again, some of you may have seen some of them, such as cutting through the noise, shifting the context, and these are tools that I use to help public affairs leaders to see problems differently, to challenge assumptions. Letting in somebody else, okay. Yeah, welcome. To challenge assumptions, and to reframe in a way the influence space. So in a way, for the moment, we'll think of them as part of the intellectual toolbox behind today's discussion, even if it's not our focus. So just a few words on me for those who know me well, less well. My perspective comes from 30 years in advocacy, working on campaigns for many different interests, and then spending quite a lot of that time building, growing, and eventually selling Logos Public Affairs, a consultancy whose DNA was rooted in consensus building and group decision making. So that experience showed me something essential, which is back to our subject, which is that the psychology behind influence is just as important as the technicality of advocacy. And over the past decade, I've worked really very deeply at the intersection of advocacy and mindset, integrating behavior science, leadership psychology, the Keys model, which we'll have a look at today, which I developed, which is a framework identifying the 4 elements that differentiate high impact public affairs professionals. So that's for presenting and setting the context. Now, before we dive more deeply into the subject, an important disclaimer and maybe a healthy touch of humility. What I will share with you today works it is tested, refined, and grounded in practice. But as you know, alignment is multi-layered. So there's no one size fits all. You know that we operate in a multidimensional ecosystem with different cultures, exposure, incentives, personalities. So my invitation, if you like, is to simply breathe this in. Some of it will validate what you already know or feel. Some of it may offer new perspectives, new language, new angles. And especially for those of you who, with 15 years or more in this field, and there's a lot of you on this call today, you know how alignment feels. I do know how misalignment costs too. All right. So now, as a warm up, let me take you into the matrix. So I would like you to be able to interact. So, well, it's good that you're keeping your camera on. It's very appreciated. It makes it more interactive. But also, you know how to use the chat, right? Because I'm going to ask you to use the chat in a minute. Um, we're going to do an experiment together. Okay. So this here is a picture of two circles, and those two circles are not equal. Okay, they're not equal. One's larger than the other. And the perception of it depends on certain factors that we will now illustrate. Okay, so in a moment, and when you're ready, I'm going to ask you to write in the chat when I say go, so that you don't influence other people, but write blue if you believe that the blue circle is larger, and write red if you believe that the red circle is larger. You ready for that? Okay, do not wait for the others. You can talk now. All right, everybody's voted. All right, there's a lot of red, actually. Nice, nice, nice. Okay, when you say the same, I suppose same as the above. All right, very good. Thanks for your participation. So yeah, before I said anything, your instinct probably was they look equal, right? And that's because they are equal. They're actually identical circles. Yeah. Yet a moment ago, nearly all of you, some are waking up late, but that's fine. That's perfectly fine. Were willing to declare. You were willing to declare publicly that they were not. So what happened? So an interesting experiment that shows that perfectly reasonable and intelligent professionals can be nudged into doubting their own intuition in a matter of a few seconds. So if you repeat a falsehood or if you utter it with enough authority, you can override instinct, logic, and even eyesight. All right. And it's not a judgment on anyone. I mean, I fell in the trap too, so don't worry about that. And that's, in a way, only half of the story. Because it happens obviously inside organizations, but also, this is also the external narratives against your sector sometimes that gets built with clear falsehood wrapped in enough framing. You know. So the truth is, in reality, and I love this concept that there is no truth. We live internally and externally inside narrative illusions, and that brings me to another, still as amuse-bouche and appetizer, another experiment that was conducted back in '69 now by a French psychologist called Serge Moscovici, who did something brilliant. He showed blue slides to a group. At the time, it was more like transparent things that you put on a projector. But anyway, so people were shown blue slides on the screen, yeah, and everybody saw them blue. And then two people who were part of the experiment team kept insisting that they were green, but calmly, consistently, no shouting, no pressure, just coherence. And as a result, 28% of the group eventually changed their perception. But they generally changed their perception that when they were interviewed they said that they saw the slides green. It was not a matter of pleasing others or conforming. It's really, the perception changed. And that's the power of what Moscovici called a minorité constante in French, so a constant minority, a small, coherent, steady voice that alters the center of gravity in the room. And it works because coherence signals competence, calmness signals confidence, and confidence invites doubts in others in a way. So influence does not belong to the majority. It belongs to the consistent and to those who show up with self-confidence. Something that you maybe have experienced yourself, or maybe you've experienced in terms of the opposition that you're facing. And basically it boils down to this. Very often, it's down to how you show up. So I'm telling you this because what you do in public affairs and what you do inside your own organizations often feels like being the minority voice. Yeah. But your voice has far more weight than you may think, or maybe you know already. But anyway, I'm just sharing that with you. So externally, your interest group's perspective also can be far more powerful than the Brussels bubble or any other bubble may suggest if you use it with consistency. And as I said, you've probably seen that. If you haven't seen that, if you haven't experienced it yourself, you've seen that from some of the groups that oppose you, who have a strong minority voice. All right. So I will just stop sharing for the moment. And so this is not a slideshow, a PowerPoint presentation. I just wanted to start with a few visuals to illustrate some of the purpose. And I'll come back to some visuals later, but now it's more like don't hesitate to intervene if you want. You can raise your electric hand or even interject directly. It's not such a big group, so we can manage the discussion if you wish. So that brings us to misalignment. And the sad reality of misalignment is that it does not only slow you down, it also diminishes the external relevance. Because decision makers want to speak to people who can influence their own organization. So if you're misaligned, you automatically look less credible because you mobilize less internal expertise. You look less connected because your hierarchy is not truly behind you in a way. And less strategic because you cannot move your own internal stakeholders. So if you cannot influence your own organization, why would a commissioner or an MEP or an MP or a minister invest capital in political capital in you? Yeah. Just as an anecdote, just to illustrate that, a number of years ago, I conducted a mission for one of the largest trade associations in Brussels in its previous incarnation. It has evolved a lot since. And the idea with the brief was to improve their influence. So I spoke to a few assistants to MEPs at the time at one of the things I was doing then to help. And they were telling me that when the lobbyists of these organizations walked into the parliament, and for those who know the European Parliament, there are big round pillars, in the European Parliament in Brussels, and the assistants were trying to walk diametrically opposed to the lobbyists in order not to meet them. So basically, they were avoiding them as much as possible, and the reason for that was not necessarily because they were bad guys or whatever, but because it systematically took a very long time for the organization to align and to come up with a common position from their members. I mean, with good justification, the membership was very diverse, very, very wide, and it was indeed difficult for them to come up with a position in time. But the lobbyists then were coming late in the process with a position that had been negotiated to the comma, basically, and could not move. So who wants to talk to someone who arrives late with a frozen message and no negotiating space? The answer was more like, send me your position paper. Thank you very much. And it was an end of the story. So as I've mentioned associations, maybe one word, because in the call today, we have I think a mix of associations and corporates. Um, and yeah, they look different. There are obviously differences between associations and corporates, but they are obviously two sides of the same coin. And in advocacy in particular, one cannot function without the other. So corporates use associations as advocacy amplifiers, and associations depend on corporate for legitimacy, for resources, of course, for political capital. So it is important that both understand the alignment dynamics to make advocacy more robust. Okay, on a more I would say more specific way in terms of alignment, associations depend more on what I would call consensus building, while corporates depend maybe more on group decision making. But that's maybe a geek's distinction. What links them though is the shared need for vision. Yeah, because again, back to the equation, leadership and storytelling are the foundations of influence, and in leadership, vision is absolutely essential. So without vision, alignment is impossible. That's where we begin. I want to start with maybe a few pillars of the core problem and why misalignment happens. Um, it's not necessarily caused by lack of intelligence or lack of resources or goodwill. It mostly emerges misalignment because organizations are human systems. And human systems react to pressure or incentives or culture, uncertainty in a fairly predictable way. So the first pillar, the first aspect to look into is the exposure spectrum. So if you've had a look at the form I sent you, I was suggesting already to look into that. So every organization on this call sits somewhere on this exposure spectrum, and it will determine how vigilant you must be, how much alignment you would need, resources, and the quickness, if you like, how quickly internal decisions must be made. So on the one side, you have organizations who sit in the serious threat sector. Yeah, industries that are in permanent scrutiny. In this group, you have chemicals, alcohol manufacturers, pesticides, big tech now, and also fast fashion, as we've seen recently. So here, the regulatory threat is so clear and it's so visible, it is very concrete that alignment tends to be tighter, not because the organization is more virtuous, but because the enemy is obvious and the objective is an existential one. So that concentrates the mind, it unifies. And here for them, I mean, the question is how can we align even better and faster because our freedom to operate is at risk. Yeah? In the middle of the spectrum, you have a more neutral sector, if you like, where organizations oscillate, sometimes aligned, sometimes drifting, depending on leadership, on culture, on political awareness. And this is where public affairs people often have the heaviest lifting to do, constantly rebuilding emergency and justifying importance in a way. So in those companies, in those organizations, there's a low perceived immediate threat, but a feeling more or less alive that we should be prepared for something. It is actually often, in fact, when an organization survives a potential catastrophe for which they were not prepared, that they decide to align and get ready for a potential crisis. You may have had this experience that I've had a number of times. And on the other side of the spectrum, you have, in a way, the perceived solution sector, companies who are riding a positive societal wave, like companies who are dealing with insulation, for instance, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, recycling, renewables, circularity. And that could be precisely where things can become fragile because the world sees you as the solution. Advocacy becomes less visible and success is attributed to the business model and not public affairs. I'll get to you, Fer. Just more, I'm just finishing this. So when I'll get to you. When the ecosystem shifts, because sometimes it shifts, then the organization discovers fairly weak advocacy muscles and poor political reflexes, and then is in a more of a threat of losing the license to operate. So anyway, we can discuss this, but that's just I'm putting in here because it's part of the diagnosis, and knowing where you are on the spectrum is an important aspect to improve alignment. Fair, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I just, this is really interesting. I just wanted to give an example or to assess an example with you, maybe along the discussion about the reflex of having an alignment based on your exposure. And one of them is the defense industry at the moment, which obviously it is a priority, but funny enough, or interestingly enough, the industry is waking up, and or that's what we sense. And there is, given that there is no regulatory threat at the moment or constant political or scrutiny at the moment, they are not. It's a very interesting industry. I don't know how you perceive it because it's not really aligned, and it's you don't feel like even if the narrative is we need to be ready, it's readiness and preparedness. From our perspective, they're not at that momentum. So it's even their exposure is readiness and preparedness. Their alignment is in their political exposure at the moment is it's not there. So that's kind of you would consider that a misalignment. I mean, it's not internal. Potentially there is internal, but it's more the external.
Yeah, sure. But it's an interesting example, and in particular to show how this political spectrum can shift too. So in a way, maybe the defense industry was more like on the scrutiny spectrum a few years ago, and now it's becoming more needed and more in the solution sphere. But this pendulum can swing. Okay, that's what, for example, the pharmaceutical industry experienced, much to their despair, when they did a very good job finding vaccines against COVID,
Yes.
thinking the world is going to be grateful, and and the gratitude lasted only a few weeks, and it went back to big pharma being the bad guys. So maybe that's what I would take at this stage from your suggestion, Fer. I mean, it's a good one, but without getting too much into the defense, I think it illustrates the purpose in terms of the possible shift of one industry from one side to the other of the spectrum.
Okay.
So the other pillar, if you like, of misalignment can come from what I call a leadership psychology. You know? So it's a decisive but often overlooked part of the alignment, or maybe it's not overlooked. It's quite obvious in a way. But there's a hard truth in a way, and that's something that I've experienced decades ago with a specific case. We can discuss that further, but generally leaders or CEOs who've never been in the political trenches, to put it this way, almost always underestimate the difficulty of the advocacy task. I tend to delegate it and underestimate the difficulty. And it creates a familiar pattern. And if you like, I have a little story about like a few decades ago already, but where a sector was at risk in a way, and the CEO turns to the PA lead and says, so Brussels is pushing this. It's totally stupid. George, handle it. You'll kill this stupid idea for me, George. And George, who's the loyal and competent and earnest executive, says, yes, boss, leave it to me. I will deal with it. But then George is fairly alone, and he faces complex dynamics in Brussels with multiple stakeholders. Well, you know how it works. And but he hesitates to bring the bad news because he does not want to confront the CEO. Maybe the CEO has unrealistic expectations because admitting difficulty feels like failure because he's carrying the task alone. So he's not weak, he's just isolated, and isolated people cannot really align organizations. So it's a bit of a caricature, but that's something that I've experienced in certain dossiers, where basically leaders of companies in their ivory tower, if you like, who haven't been in the trenches of getting the body language of the stakeholders, delegate and believe that their man or woman in Brussels can do it, and end up with a misalignment. And this manifests differently across various company cultures. Yes, please. Yes, please.
Just a question on that. I agree about the points that you've just made. I mean, have you, in your experience, sort of, if there is a CEO that behaves that way, that effectively they can delegate responsibility to somebody else to sort of deal with a tough regulatory challenge, have you ever seen where a CEO, because their company has then fallen victim to some sort of regulatory event or some crisis or whatever, that they have actually changed their behavior and therefore become more proactive in sort of stakeholder outreach, in lobbying, in policy advocacy, whatever it is, as a result of that? So have you seen that behavior change rather than just sticking to this, hands-free sort of approach?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the question. It's Stuart, right?
Yeah.
Hi. Good to have you with
Okay,
us.
thanks.
Uh, um, yeah, yeah. In fact, the example that I was thinking about, I'll tell you what it is, but it's a very old dossier. It was one of my first dossiers with Logos Public Affairs, first important ones, and that was the cosmetics industry. And we were dealing with a modification of the directive that focused on animal testing. It was a very vexed issue. And basically, if you like, the story of George is the story of mostly French companies sitting in Paris. And I can say that because I'm French, so I can criticize them more easily, telling their guys, well, this is bullshit. You have to kill this because it's nonsense. And I would understand that they would feel like this. Uh, but at the time, I was first working with the European Federation, and then we stopped working with them, and we worked for Unilever, who was part of the cosmetics industry. And there was a big shift in Unilever, a moment where the CEO of Europe came to an event that we had organized with the rapporteur at the time of the European Parliament, a very forceful lady who told him at the event, face to face, "You have to know that I don't trust your industry." And he got really the body language and really the aggression, if you like, firsthand. And that exactly like what you suggest, that changed, that shifted totally the attitude of Unilever towards their engagement as good citizens, if you like, in a dossier like this one. Yeah. Fair. Yeah, you have a suggestion.
Sorry, no, I don't. uh, I mean, I think it's clear, looking at the reports that you shared, that one of the main challenges that we face as a corporation or even as a public affairs department, if you call it like that, is a misalignment between the decision making or C-suite and the department, and the lack of understanding of what we do and why, how to ingrain it strategically in your process, internal process. Do you have any recommendations with your experience? How can we, integrate it into the management team and also into the corporate strategy in order to be proactive and not only reactive?
Yeah, well, I think it's the purpose of this whole talk, right? It's a
I know,
very good
but just for
question, but
very
it says
practical
it
one.
says it says the context for what we're talking about, or do you have something more specific? Yeah.
More specific in terms of our line of communication with the CEO, in order to not be, delegated, but to have this. I mean, I know varies from person to person, but systematically have this conversation with the CEO so we can, be more strategic in his eyes or her eyes.
Yeah, certainly. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. There's a whole there's a whole methodology that I would suggest. But in a way, there's also maybe a bit of a warning in terms of the CEO, depending on the organization with which you work. I mean, CEOs of large organizations, you have a limited amount of time of face time with them. Okay, so there's that too. I mean, you really need to choose your moment and make sure that it's totally relevant. But we'll get to that. And there are three questions in particular that we need to bear in mind in order to be relevant to our stakeholders, internal and external, and CEO included. Yeah, Adam.
Yes, sorry, just a small comment to this. Again, as you also just alluded to, the size of the organization also has something to say with this, because the CEO is approached by everybody, and everybody feels that exactly their point, that exactly what they're coming with must be the most important stuff of the day or of the week. So I guess sometimes, at least from my experience, sometimes it's actually better to not overplay your hand, but sort of retract a little bit and then try to somehow, I know that's super easy to say, but put it in the CEO's context. I mean, if she or he is a former CFO, well, you know what language to talk to them if they have some kind of other background. So basically, just don't overplay, because that would be irritate them.
I agree with that entirely. And by the way, I see that Rob has his hand raised, and we discussed that, Rob, something like 2 weeks ago. I think you were making this point. Sarah, did you want to say something, or your hand went down?
Yeah, no, it was related to the point that was made, has been made, but I also see a difference between, because your example was about a French European company, which is largely different if you are talking about a global company with a headquarters in, for example, in the US, where the extra layers is that your manager maybe doesn't really understand the how the EU bubble works. And so then the expectations, which I put in the chat, the expectations that she's or that person is selling to the CEO is no problem, we can make it happen, which is not what the message that you are from Brussels passing to there. So it's just that it would be great to see that complexity a little bit, a layer extra versus European company versus a global company as well.
True. Yeah. Well, the French companies I was alluding to actually it was a global company, but headquartered.
No, but I mean, if you're a European company, you have better access because you create more jobs in Europe, etc. So that is the expectation. So versus a US headquarter or Chinese headquarter company, which maybe is that was the point. Thank you.
No, indeed. And I see that Sebastian in the chat shares something also to the same level, saying there are other layers. Of course, there are other layers for sure. Thanks for that. Rob.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to maybe a little bit come back on as you said, the comments made in the past, but I mean, I do think we talk about the CEO, and I think that that's sometimes a little bit of a trap, right? Because what we're really talking about is the involvement of senior business executives in advocacy, right? And it's very rare that you need the CEO of a global corporation to do a meeting in Brussels. But usually global corporations also have, somebody responsible for the European business, who essentially is the CEO of the European business. And that is, I think, in my experience, a perfectly acceptable level to go to when you need to roll out a senior executive. Or if you're doing a major issue in the UK, it's perfectly appropriate to take the leader of your business in the UK in to see a minister or whatever it happens to be. So I think we sometimes tend to shoot too high for what we need, and we tend to maybe make things more dramatic than they need to be. And I think it's very important on us very important for us to ask for the right thing, and not ask. We don't always need the global CEO or even the regional CEO, and sometimes there's many levels, at least in a large corporation. There's many levels often of management, and I think what's important to government stakeholders is that they see somebody senior in the organization who's coming to represent the organization.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, when mentioning CEO, I meant leadership and CEO and the appropriate leadership. But thanks for the specification. It's really nice that I'm pleased that we have in this conversation. I have prepared a presentation that could last 80 minutes, but hopefully I will reduce it to give space for you guys to participate, because you have really interesting experience to share. So thanks for that. Marco, you wanted to say something?
Yes, no, it was just a bit on the previous point. I completely agree. I think being clear on who you target internally, and Jose, the point you're making obviously about broader leadership audience, I think for me it's critical also to understand how do you land the balance right about making senior leaders aware of the matter without necessarily pulling them to the meeting in Brussels or taking 2 hours on their kind of a weekly meeting schedule. But how do you use that, making people aware to support the point you're making about internal alignment? Because sometimes even just being able to say the regional president, the CEO, or that senior leader is aware and is requesting for this and that can then support massive or can boost significantly the internal alignment process. So it's a delicate balance to play. I think to me, I haven't landed yet the recipe for that.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. We'll get to that hopefully. I mean, during this session. Yeah. Yeah. So, like I said, I mean, this aspect manifests differently across different company cultures too. So you have some company cultures which are more engineer-led cultures. Like, for instance, I work with cement companies or with electricity companies, to a certain degree, automotive companies, where it's more an engineer type of environment. So with rational, technically brilliant, but often maybe slower to pick up on societal signals, and sometimes a bit lower in political instinct. I'm generalizing, of course. I know that we have something. So we have Stuart from Volvo here who may disagree because there's a political astuteness of Volvo in a way. But that's a generalization. I've seen that with cement manufacturers in particular, and electricity. Then you have the more lawyer-driven, pharma-style culture, with higher regulatory literacy, if I may say, and more comfortable with politics. And then you may have a more business school culture with FMCG, retail, tech, where there's an element of agility, good storytelling, but sometimes maybe on the other hand, overconfident about their political intuition. So the company culture matters a lot also in this field. Okay. So getting and we'll get back to that on the how. At the moment, we're still on the on the phase of the diagnosis and stating the context and the picture. So the third pillar that I've identified in terms of misalignment is again it's all again a human dynamics thing, but I would say it doesn't, misalignment does not necessarily start with strategy documents. It starts with a concept, an interesting one, which is self-protection, where you see patterns like the fear of exposure or blame. You have non-experts overestimating their political understanding, real experts doubting their own authority, information potentially being hoarded because knowledge is currency, an instinct not to rock the boat, and also back to the leadership and CEO KPIs that reward silo performance more than collective outcomes, which can be a real issue for public affairs practitioners. So And so the symptoms are you know the symptoms well, decisions that take months when they could have taken days, and messages that get diluted, strategies that morph from one form to another, and without anyone owning the shift in the end, endless loops, etc. So that's on that layer, really. I mean, this aspect, and we can go deeper into the psychology of things, but you will sense it. It's a lot of it is about self-protection. So now that we have the landscape, the exposure level, the leadership style and reality, the human dynamics, and we know the external cost of misalignment. So that's the terrain on which we progress. Now we can move to the map, and from the diagnosis to the blueprint, if you like. And I would suggest maybe a method. So there is an architecture to it, and so moving from the why in a way to the how, or the what to the how, and the first element and the first pillar then of the construction of internal alignment, to me, is one that nearly every advocacy strategy forgets, and that's the vision. So not the corporate blah blah about sustainability leadership or the poster in the lobby, but the real thing. And I've worked with a lot of organizations about making the vision more specific, because a true vision answers a question which is, in a way, brutally simple. And the question is, how is the world a better place because we exist? How am I making the world a better place with my contribution? And that's the question that the vision should answer. And that's the problem, because most organizations fail. In fact, they fail to use their vision in advocacy, because and I can say we, I mean, we get pushed into the ropes. The legislative machinery, whether in Brussels or somewhere else, is very active, very relentless, and with lots of scrutiny. And the position is well organized. And so, like a boxer, if you like, under pressure, organizations become very defensive and develop what we call in martial arts, I don't know if you know this, tunnel vision. So, instead of enlarging the vision and using the vision itself as an asset. So that's defense, reactiveness, survival. But without the vision, leadership is impossible. And as you know the formula, if you don't have leadership, then your influence diminishes. Okay. So for me, that's the first pillar of alignment, is really reinforcing this aspect of vision. And then the second pillar, in a way, is about the three alignment conversations that I believe we should have, and that a lot of people or organizations dodge, in a way. Yes, Stuart, please.
Hi, just want to pick up on your point about the vision, about how, it should be around how is the world a better place because we exist, essentially the license to operate of the company. I would sort of challenge that a bit. I would say that, and I was director of global sustainability at Volvo before I took on my present job. I would say that sort of focus would resonate about 2 years ago. But what I can see in the sustainability place, including the corporate sustainability place, and I think it is because of the political times and the political pressures that we live in, is that there's a lot of greenwashing going on by companies, quite honestly, where before they would trumpet their achievements, how they would make the world a better place, a lot quieter. I mean, corporate attendance at COP this year was down considerably on previous years. So I just guess whether or not I think you're absolutely right, and I agree, but I would say whether at a senior corporate level that thinking is still would be still sort of, would still resonate? And is it not more focused now because of some of the political pressures they're under? White House, whatever it is, you've seen companies toning down DEI stuff. Would that still resonate in a global corporate environment, or would it be something more around sort of how, not the triple bottom line stuff, but more back to how it was before, about actually generation of profit, revenue to shareholders or whatever, just playing devil's advocate a bit, whether or not that approach would still sort of hold sway in today's time?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the fact that maybe um, the narrative about vision is well less received, if you like, doesn't eliminate it as something that is an absolutely must do. You see what I mean? It may be less powerful today than it was at another stage, but I cannot see an advocacy strategy without it. Yeah. So take again pharmaceuticals, for instance. Pharmaceuticals tend to be criticized for many things. And yeah, you can answer on each of the points. But the best answer is, to zoom out and to reinforce the global picture of what pharmaceuticals have done for humanity the past 100 years or whatever it is. And as far as I'm concerned, I know very well as a person, how pharmaceuticals saved my life, and maybe the life of my children. So to me, it's really a base, and maybe it's being eroded in a way. I can accept that, but it's really the base. Rob.
Yeah, I'm of a slightly different view on this. I mean, I think it's important for every company to try and to talk about, the good it provides. But, not every company's saving the planet. Not every company's, got some massively new innovative this or is super sustainable that, or there's a whole swath of the economy that just makes things that people need or want, uh, that creates jobs in local communities, creates economic activity, that pays taxes, um, you know, and does some very basic things, hopefully very well and responsibly and in compliance with rules and regulations and as sustainably as possible. But I don't think we should underestimate the value of just doing whatever it is you do and doing it well, doing it, in a way that creates economic, activity, which creates jobs, employment, all that stuff. And, I think if you sometimes you're always looking to say how company X is changing the planet. I mean, sometimes it's true, and sometimes it's a little bit of a stretch. And I just think that authenticity is critically important.
Oh, very much, very much. Yeah, I agree with that entirely. And the vision is not necessarily saving the planet or doing, global things. It can be just, making people a little happier. It could help already quite a lot, and that could be part of the vision, and then people can appreciate that. In addition to creating jobs and paying taxes and doing the right stuff, for sure. Yeah. Laurie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Just agreeing with Robert. So I work for a global association that represents GMOs and pesticides, and unsurprisingly, that is not entirely universally beloved. But the conversations that I've had where I have talked more personally, right? So as you talked about storytelling off the top, we all work for the organizations we work for because we have to a certain degree, believe in them or the technologies they represent. You talked about pharma. I think that's where there's been a bit more of a compelling discussion sometimes with policymakers is around why I work and work for the organization I do. And so, something that really struck me was that in the three areas of misalignment that you talked about, the technical. So we tend to be a very technical organization that is doing advocacy. And I'd say our areas of misalignment always kind of stem from, when we have an aligned policy, I talk about bringing it to a chief of staff. But then the technical folks are like, but, and but where we've found, I think, common ground always is where we talk about not overstating the sustainability and the food security and that piece too much, but the why we do what we do. And so I think companies can sometimes have a challenge balancing the sustainability overstretch with the reality of the day-to-day fact that they do business for a reason. But
thank you. Yeah, thank you for that, Laurie. In fact, your industry as well as the chemicals industry are the examples that I give very often when I explain, and we'll get to that if we have time. When we get to the keys model, and I'm working a lot on the energy aspect of the keys model, and we have identified four domains which either drain energy or provide energy, and the last but not least is the purpose. So having a purpose, and I often use the example of a friend of mine who, for many reasons, reorganized his life and from lawyer became the legal counsel for Greenpeace. Okay, people may think what they want about Greenpeace, but he was finding a purpose. And basically, when he wakes up in the morning, he knows why. And where I use, the pesticides industry or chemicals industry in this context to say, when you work for the pesticides industry or the chemicals industry, I could not imagine a society without chemicals or without pesticides. How are we going to feed the planet if we don't have, those products? However, you need to put more oil in the machinery and re-energize people in terms of the purpose more often, because you're getting a lot of dirt basically from all sorts of stakeholders. So yeah, I understand entirely, but the vision of the companies that are part of your membership is a very live vision and a very important one. And yeah, well, okay, people may criticize you for one thing or the other, but the vision is there and it's very important. So anyway, moving on, if it's okay. I was getting into the conversation, the three essential conversations, and you see there may be some relevance with what we've heard now. So the first one is the truth conversation. And this is where you name the uncomfortable issue openly and early and clearly. So preparing for this session, I spoke to a friend of mine who's working in advocacy in a large food multinational. And he challenged me on my claim that misalignment was the number one killer of advocacy. He said, the biggest killer of advocacy is not misalignment, is the tendency to dodge uncomfortable truths. And he was right. He was right. But in reality, we're both right, of course, because dodging the truth and misalignment are not separate phenomena. Truth avoidance, in a way, is the engine of misalignment. So if you cannot name the issue internally, how can you win it externally? Okay, so that's the first conversation in the pillar, or the second pillar, which is the alignment conversations. The second conversation that I would suggest we should have is what I call the North Star conversation, and that articulates, what are we trying to achieve, why it matters, and for whom it matters. Fairly straightforward, but it's the base if you want to align other departments and make sure that others stop behaving like isolated baronies in a way and contribute to a shared mission. And the third conversation is what I call the red line conversation, something that particular associations might have more difficulties deal with, which is what will we fight for? What will we not fight for? And what will we not pretend to fight for? So these red lines are very important to avoid a drift into some sort of political schizophrenia, if you like, because if you try to please everyone, you end up convincing no one. I'm moving on because I have a lot to tell you. but if you feel an urge to interject, please raise your hand. The third pillar is what I call the alignment gravity, and I'm using a space analogy there because space teaches a very interesting lesson about forces we cannot see. So what I'm saying is that alignment creates gravity, while misalignment creates spin. So when gravity is strong and alignment is strong, you see converging messages, faster decisions, experts. No, I'm not sharing slides, Claude. Don't worry. But I will share slides later if you want. Experts stepping forward at the right moment, and leadership speaking with one voice, etc. And when gravity is weak, you see different aspects, like maybe the legal department sanitizing everything, or the commercial department resisting this truth conversation we spoke about. And basically the public affairs department stitching together a narrative that is not really owned. Yeah. So gravity is created by clarity, truth, and energy. And I like this analogy because the fabric of the universe and gravity. If you've learned these things, which are very fashionable these days. So when gravity increases, alignment becomes almost effortless because things flow your way by bending, if you like, the fabric of the ecosystem. Now I'll share something with you in just a moment because I wanted to share the fourth pillar here is the pillar of that is developed with keys. So that's where the keys model that we have developed with my team takes its power in a way. So the keys model basically is keys is the acronym of 4 elements on which we believe we should work to be better at what we do. And it was developed mostly with advocacy and public affairs in mind. It's actually transferable to many kinds of occupation. You can be in research, in finance, whatever, and still use it. But it was really developed with advocacy and public affairs in mind. So the K of the model is the knowledge of the ecosystem. So for advocacy professionals, it's a bit of a no-brainer. It's a bit of an obvious one. You need to know how the system works, but also not only the decision-making system, but also your own organizations. Yeah? So knowing how the system works is the key of the knowledge of the keys model. The E is the E of expertise. It's basically your technical backbone, your ability to speak with clarity and with factual authority. So in a way, if you like, for an analogy in terms of the advocacy world, a public affairs consultant should score very high on knowledge of how the system works. And between 0 and 100, I would say, if you take 100 as a maximum, on expertise, and an in-house person, someone working in a corporate environment, would score closer to 100 on expertise, and between 0 and 100 on knowledge of how the system works, depending on what he's done before, if he's worked in government or in consultancy before, etc. So just to understand the system. So the expertise is really the currency of credibility, but it's also, interestingly, where imposter syndrome can bite, especially when you actually know a lot. But again, imposter syndrome is another conversation, but if you're interested, we can have that at another stage. The S of soft skills is basically, you know what soft skills are, but the way I like to picture it is the ability that you have to connect with other human beings. It's not only communication, it's really the connection. and what I like to say, if you like, if you go far in terms of the soft skills concept, is once you've read all the books, once you've had all the trainings, what is going to make a difference is your level of self-awareness. So basically, it's how you've incorporated your shadow part, if you like, if you want to listen to Carl Jung, or your limitations and your weaknesses, and how you have accepted a number of aspects about yourself, and that will make a huge difference between the ability to connect with other human beings or not, in a truthful and deep way. So the why is the why of energy, and it's the most misunderstood factor. Okay, energy is the difference between winning or losing, basically, or achieving or not achieving. I mean, you probably have seen. I mean, most of you have decades of experience, and you've seen in your professional life people whose knowledge, expertise, and energy, and soft skills were adequate, not great, but they had such a dose of energy, of drive, that they were going very far and achieving what they wanted to achieve. And sadly, the opposite can be true. You can have people with a very good or excellent level of expertise, very good knowledge of their ecosystem, adequate soft skill, but if the energy is not there, they will not get to where they want to go. So this system for me is really integrated into anything that has to do with public affairs and advocacy, and would work in particular, but particularly well with the alignment aspect. So like I said before, but I just repeated that very briefly. I mean, we have identified 4 domains that either drain or feed energy. And the one that I have focused here is the last one, is the purpose, which is directly connected with the vision, by the way. There are 3 other ones, but when we have more time, we can discuss the other elements that either drain or feed energy. Yes, Sebastian.
Thanks, Jose. I'm wondering about the last 2, the energy and the soft skills, how they are impacted by the move to like virtual interactions. I find it much harder to transmit the energy when you're not actually in the room with somebody, right? And looking someone in the eyes. Is this something you've read about, or maybe have some suggestions on how to deal with that when you have that limitation, let's say you're not physically together in a room?
You're right. You're right. I mean, we're still learning on this, right?
Yeah.
Since COVID, where we were forced to do what we do now, basically to have virtual meetings. But I agree. I mean, for me, I'm old school, I must confess. Okay, I'm not as young as I look. And so yeah, I have an obvious preference for being in a room with a person where we can sniff each other, if I may say, feel the vibe, and that's certainly much better. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know. I mean, do you feel my energy today?
But
So
yeah, there are ways to do it. Yeah, you just have to maybe try even harder than to make it
No,
make
but
this
I understand.
right.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I understand where you come from. I mean,
yeah,
increasingly we're working in teams with people who are far away in other countries and things, and it adds a level of complexity and of difficulty for sure. Yeah.
also focus, I think, is an issue when you're not. Yeah, it's much easier to be distracted if you're not.
Exactly. And multitasking is a catastrophe.
Yeah,
I agree. I agree with
so
that.
all that next on the energy level, I think, of people.
Yeah. So look, what I'm going to suggest now, if you want, so that you can maybe absorb a few things, and we're going to take 3 minutes for you to have a silent exercise, if you agree. Look at the keys model. So you make sure that you understood what is meant by the 4 elements. If you have questions, don't hesitate. It's the right moment. And this model, in fact, can serve as an assessment model, okay? Self-assessment. So how would you rate yourself in each, and you do that for yourself. You don't need to share. If you want to share, of course, you're welcome, but you don't need to. take this spidergram, you can draw it on a piece of paper. It's an easy spidergram with just 4 elements. How would you rate yourself on those 4 elements? What do you think your level of knowledge is, your level of soft skills, your expertise, and your level of energy? And then you can do that also for your team and for your organization. So, and for the team, obviously you may wonder, well, what's the soft skills of a team? But yeah, what's the ability of your team to connect with the human side of things? And you can even ask that for your entire organization, even if it's a multinational. What's my company, even a multinational, ability to connect with human beings? Okay? So I'll leave you 3 minutes to digest that, and I'll come back in 3 minutes.
So from 0 to 100, you mean? Or
Well, that's my suggestion. If you want to go from 0 to 10, it's also as good. What's the percentage, if you like, of knowledge that you have, of expertise, and so on and so forth. See you in 3 minutes. Okay, we are back. I don't know if you need more time to go through this. Okay, can I invite you? I will invite you back into the session. Everybody went to take a coffee or what? All right. Any comments on this exercise? What did you think about it? Adam?
Oh, it's super easy to do when you're just one person. I don't have to break my team.
So you could replicate.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great.
So, but it's super fun. It's also, I guess, from a team perspective, it'd be very, very nice to have as a frame of reference when discussing how are we going to move on further, and how do we support each other within the different dimensions. I mean, one might not be super full of energy, but you could probably help her get in that way, or
Yeah,
vice versa.
yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely.
Jose,
Okay,
Jose,
yes.
just a couple comments. I think it seems to me that the model is really focused on individual people, right? First and foremost. And so when you look at a team or an organization, you could see it as the sum of a number of people, and then that could be a way of thinking about it. But it also strikes me that when you get into talking about um, the efficacy of an organization in terms of advocacy, or in particular, that there are things that go beyond these four factors which also come into play, right? You can have be very good on these four things and maybe not have enough resource to execute whatever it is you're trying to execute, for example. So I think that this split between individuals and an organization is something that merits maybe some thinking and discussion.
Yeah, yeah, it's true that this model was sort of with individuals at the center, but I've done a lot of this exercise of switching from individual to team and organization, and it has served a purpose. It's not entirely perfect, but hopefully you've learned a few things, and in terms of it. But I like to think also of teams and companies as entities, and as entities you can apply the model to them. Yeah. Well-managed team has hierarchies than its member. Yeah, yeah, you're right, Claude. I agree with that. All right, look, I mean, I'd like to move on because we have like 15 minutes until 2. I still have time after that, but I know that you're all busy people, so I'd like to wrap up as close to 2 as possible, and then we can continue the conversation for those who want to stay on. Okay. So, in fact, um, there's a dimension that's almost never talked about in public affairs. You cannot align an organization if you yourself are internally misaligned, if you see what I mean. So our own personal alignment is not a luxury. It's an amplifier, or it can be a saboteur for our influence efforts. So, you know, going back to the experiments that we did at the beginning of the session with the two circles and the blue circle, I mean, this minority voice. And I won't get back to it because we've spoken about that already. But this aspect of internal alignment is one that I see as key uh, for our performance. So the keys model is not only an organizational engine, it's obviously a personal alignment engine where the knowledge, if you like, would bring clarity, where expertise provides confidence, soft skills brings connection, and energy is related to presence. And just mentioning here, this is also a concept that I like a lot, and I've built actually a community. Some of you here in this session are part of this community called Inside Out, because for me, influence starts from the inside to go to the outside. If you're interested in the community, by the way, just ask me later, and I will explain. So basically, what we've seen is that there are 6 pillars. Okay, or at least I suggest that we can work on 6 pillars for alignment: the vision, the exposure spectrum, the psychology and culture of the company, leadership and CEO, or whatever adequate level. The human dynamics, where we've seen like this self-protection reflex that can be a barrier to alignment. The alignment conversations and the influence engine, basically. Now, answering a previous question, maybe now with this section, and then I'll get to the tool and the GPT that we've designed for you. Again, we'll do a silent exercise, but keep your cameras on. Just take 1 minute for this exercise. And no one needs to speak or share, but just follow the thread. Okay, so first, bring someone in mind. Bring someone to your mind inside your organization. And if today you're working on your own, maybe it can be a client, or you can go back in time where you were in an organization, whatever you want. Someone inside your organization whose alignment you need, but you rarely get it fully. Yeah. So think about this person. It could be your CEO. It could be another leader. It could be a country manager, a board member if you're in an association. Okay, if you have them. Now I'm going to make 3 statements. Okay, and just notice whether each one feels true of that person. So statement number 1, when you think about this person feels you do not fully understand their world or their pressures or their interests or KPIs or their fears or their political constraints. So just notice if that resonates. Second statement, this person is not entirely convinced that you are aligned with their priorities or that the timing of your request is right for them. Okay, again, see if that works in regard to this person. And the third statement is, this person does not clearly see how aligning with you helps them win. You know, how it makes their life easier, safer, or more successful. So basically, if you felt even one of those statements is true, then you've just diagnosed why alignment with that person is difficult. Yeah. And here we did not analyze the argument or the strategy, but we examined in a way the psychological conditions that decide whether anyone, CEO, policymaker, or colleague will align with you. And these 3 conditions are not mine, they're universal, and they operate in politics, in organizations, in coalitions, in families, everywhere. And these are the 3 questions, basically. The first question is, do they believe I understand their world? So, do the people I want to align with believe that I understand their world? And that's a foundation. People align when they feel that I understand them. And understanding in a way comes before persuasion. If they feel I get them, they open up. If they feel I don't, they defend. Just anecdotally, when I was a young consultant a while ago, my boss told me something brilliant that stayed with me until today. He said, as a consultant, said, Jose, the objective is simple, our objective. Our client must get a promotion. So we were working on advocacy and public affairs, but it sounded funny, but it's profoundly true. You know, it forces to understand what success looks like for the other person and to align my strategy with basically their reality. It's a bit like stakeholder management. You know, there's a concept called stakeholder management in our craft, and I find it extremely arrogant to talk about managing. Who do you think you are to think that you're going to manage your stakeholders? Let's talk about serving stakeholders. Because when you understand their world deeply, and your work helps them succeed, then you have the relationship. So that's the first question. The second question is, do they believe I'm aligned with their vision, priorities, and constraints, including timing? Alignment creates safety. And here, again, my example is a senior vice president of a multinational I've worked with for years, had a metaphor that I loved, and he called it la courte échelle en français. So the short ladder. So I help you climb up, and then you pull me. Okay? So that's alignment and trust, and it's mutual protection. So people will follow me if they feel that I'm climbing the ladder with them, not shaking it. So it's not just about agreeing with my proposal. It's showing that I understand the moment, the exposure, the constraints, and that I will not expose them politically. And finally, the third question is, do they believe that I can help them win? And is there something in for them? Okay, so that's the WIFT dimension, what's in it for them. So senior people align when aligning with me helps them either reduce risk, strengthen the position, or gain credibility, or avoid conflict, prepare a future fight, or all of this combined. So my example on this is that years ago I took a habit when briefing members of parliament to always make sure to give them the full picture, not only our arguments, but also exactly what the opposition would say and how they would attack. Because the fastest way to lose a champion is to let them raise their head above the parapet and get shot. Okay, so they align because I help them win, basically. A few other things I want to tell you, but I will skip for the moment. So I'll keep attention for a later conversation. But so to recap what we've done so far, we've taken a first pass diagnostic, if you like, in terms of misalignment. We've seen where misalignment might hide and how your exposure shapes your reflexes in a way, and which psychological patterns can block or free your influence. Now, the system that we've put together that you can use already tomorrow morning or even this afternoon is contained into this GPT that I'm going to share with you. And it's built on the keys model and the pillars that I outline. Okay. So it's based on the 6 pillars of alignment, the keys model, the exposure logic, the leadership psychology, and alignment conversations. And what it does, basically, it audits your internal alignment reality. I have something here. Yeah. It audits your internal alignment reality deeply. It will ask you questions that expose real pressures, fault lines, sources of spin. It recommends improvements, not 20 ideas. I mean, we've tried to streamline it, maybe the 3 that matters the most for your current context. And it gives you a workflow, a practical sequence. So I'm not. It's a GPT. It is fed with a lot of wisdom that we've put into it. I'm not saying that it's the silver bullet. Of course, you will use it if you want for to enlighten your work. But nothing beats a conversation with a human being. So that's why I was suggesting that your participation to this webinar comes with a 30-minute conversation with me. If you want, you can have this conversation with me, a 30-minute conversation in order to either discuss those aspects further or help you implement the GPT into your work. So that's my Calendly. So we can copy it or use it now if you want. If you want to take a 30-minute appointment with me, I've freed quite a lot of time in the 2 weeks to come if you want to carry on during those 2 weeks. But it can also be in January if you're more comfortable with letting December go. So just to close, I'm managing to close just before 2. I'm very proud of myself. But again, we can stay if you want to continue the conversation. So internal alignment is obviously not a solo sport. Okay, you don't need to carry everything on your own, as you know, and the way to win is by knowing where to find clarity, where to find leverage, and possibly when to ask for help. And here I'm preaching for my own church, of course. So years ago, I don't know if any of you, or Rob, you did, you came across Tom Spencer, the late Tom Spencer. He wrote me a recommendation years ago that stayed with me and that touched me. He said, if you need to venture into the jungle of public affairs, Jose is the man to take with you. So it was perhaps his generous exaggeration, but the spirit's right. So resourcefulness begins with reaching out, and also it's a collective act. So take what we explored today, let it settle, let it work for you. And if you need a companion in the jungle, I'm only one message or one call away. So here we are. And I would love to hear your questions. The GPT with the link to the GPT will be sent to you too. Questions, suggestions, criticisms, additions, omissions. All
Jose,
clear?
I'll jump in if that's okay. First of all,
Please,
thank you
please,
very
yes.
much. I think it's really energizing, actually, back to the energy in keys to actually have this kind of forum and conversation. And I think what it makes me realizing, also hearing from people on the call, obviously on top of what we heard from you, it's such a complex topic, and we all experience it in our own ways. But having some kind of framework to be able to do some assessments, to put things a bit in a box and then reconnect the boxes, and again, hearing from other people's experience, I find it extremely rich and helpful. So big thank you for this. And I think it feels to me like it's a topic that deserves conversations. Many of these conversations. It's not something you can just tick off in an hour and a half and then it's done and it's on your belt or on your sleeve and you can just move forward. But really interesting to discover this. And yeah, again, it's always eyes opening hearing from other people and from you on this for sure.
Thank you very much, Marco. Thank you for the kind words. And likewise, I mean, thank you also for your participation and for the energy and for being present, for leaving your camera on, which for those who could, that's very appreciated. I like to see your smiling faces, and yeah. And any other questions or suggestions before we say goodbye and go back to our busy worlds?
Thank you very much.
Okay, if there's no other questions, okay, like I said, I'm just a message or a phone call away. Don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll be very happy to pursue the conversation. So we'll adjourn now, and
Thank
thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you, Jose.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jose.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jose.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Jose.
Bye.
Thank you.